Have you ever looked at your bank account after making your monthly car payment and wondered if you accidentally bought a small country instead of a Honda Civic? Well, congratulations. You might be what financial experts are calling car poor, and you're definitely not alone in this expensive club that nobody actually wants to join. My name is Nick, and I help people understand how modern life seems designed to separate us from our money in the most creative ways possible. If you're tired of feeling like your car owns you instead of the other way around, make sure to subscribe to the channel and hit that like button if this video helps you realize you're not going crazy. Here's something that might shock you or make you feel slightly better about your financial situation. Nearly 1 in 4 Americans are officially car poor in 2025, meaning their vehicle expenses are stretching their budgets tighter than yoga pants after Thanksgiving dinner. We're talking about people spending an average of 24% of their monthly income just to keep their wheels turning, which is almost double what financially stable car owners spend. But here's where it gets really interesting and honestly a bit terrifying. This isn't just about those monthly payments that make you question your life choices. Car poor Americans are trapped in a web of expenses that goes way deeper than what most people realize, and the ripple effects are destroying financial futures across the country. When I say destroying, I'm not being dramatic. Vehicle ownership has limited nearly 40% of Americans' ability to save for major life goals, like buying a home, getting an education, or preparing for retirement. Think about that for a moment. 2 out of 5 people in this country are watching their dreams get repoed along with their financial security, all because of transportation costs that have spiraled completely out of control. The situation is particularly brutal for younger generations. Half of Gen Z can't afford homeownership, education, or retirement, specifically because of car ownership expenses. These are people who should be building wealth and planning their futures, but instead they're feeding money into machines that lose value faster than ice cream melts in Arizona. Now, you might be thinking this is just about people making poor financial decisions or buying cars they can't afford. And sure, that happens, but the reality is much more complex and frankly more disturbing than individual choice. The numbers tell a story of a transportation system that has become fundamentally broken for average Americans. Let's talk about what car ownership actually costs in 2025, because I guarantee the real numbers are higher than what you're thinking. The total cost of owning and operating a new vehicle has reached $11,577 annually. That breaks down to $964.78 every single month, which is more than many people pay for rent in some parts of the country. Even though that represents a slight decrease from 2024, we're still looking at nearly $12,000 per year to own a car. For context, that's enough money to take a very nice vacation, max out an IRA contribution, or cover several months of groceries for a family. Instead, it's disappearing into the black hole of vehicle ownership. The monthly payment itself averages $749 for new cars and $529 for used vehicles. But here's the part that really gets me. The average new car now costs $50,000. $50,000. That's a down payment on a house in many markets, or enough money to completely change someone's life if invested properly. Used cars aren't much better at an average of $25,000, which means even the supposedly affordable option is still a massive financial commitment that most families struggle to handle. When did reliable transportation become a luxury item that requires financing terms longer than most people stay at their jobs? Insurance alone is costing car owners an average of $1,694 per year, and that's just for the privilege of legally driving the expensive machine you're already paying for. Add in registration fees, maintenance, repairs, fuel costs, and the opportunity cost of having all that money tied up in something that's losing value every day, and you start to understand why so many people feel financially suffocated by their vehicles. Financial experts recommend spending no more than 10 to 15% of your disposable income on transportation costs, but reality shows most Americans are blowing past that recommendation like they're late for work. The Consumer Price Index indicates transportation expenses average around 16.8% of overall budgets, and that's just the average. For car poor households, we're talking about 20 to 25% or more. Let me put this in perspective with actual numbers. The median household income in America is around $85,000. If you're spending that average $964 monthly on vehicle ownership, you're dedicating nearly 14% of your gross income to this single expense category. But remember, that's gross income before taxes take their bite. After federal taxes, state taxes, Social Security, and Medicare, that same household might be taking home around $60,000, which means vehicle expenses are consuming nearly 20% of their actual spending power. Suddenly, that recommended 10 to 15% looks like a fantasy for most working families. The situation becomes even more absurd when you consider regional variations and income levels. A household making $56,000, which is the lower end of the middle class range, could easily be spending 30% or more of their income on transportation. At that point, you're not just car poor, you're getting close to car broke. Here's where things get really ugly, and this might be the most important part of understanding how people get trapped in car poverty. About 26.6% of people trading in vehicles toward new car purchases had negative equity in 2025. That means more than 1 in 4 people owe more money on their car than it's actually worth. The average amount of negative equity hit $6,754, which means these people are starting their next car purchase already in the hole by nearly $7,000. Think about the mathematical impossibility of that situation. You're buying a depreciating asset while simultaneously going deeper into debt, creating a cycle that becomes nearly impossible to escape. It gets worse. Buyers who rolled this debt into new loans paid an average of $915 per month, the highest on record, and $159 more than the industry average. These people aren't just car poor, they're financially underwater in the most literal sense possible. The loan industry has responded to this affordability crisis not by addressing the underlying problems, but by extending payment terms to dangerous lengths. 7-year auto loans made up 22.4% of all new vehicle financing in 2025, an all-time high. 7 years. That's longer than most people keep their phones, longer than many marriages last, and definitely longer than most cars should reasonably be expected to run without major problems. When you're still making payments on a 7-year-old car that needs major repairs, you start to understand how transportation costs can completely derail a person's financial life. You're paying for something that no longer reliably gets you where you need to go, but you can't afford to replace it because you still owe money on it. This creates what economists call a poverty trap, where the cost of being poor makes it expensive to stop being poor. You can't afford a reliable car, so you buy a cheaper, unreliable car that breaks down frequently, costing you money in repairs and potentially your job due to missed work, which makes it even harder to afford reliable transportation. The psychology of this trap is particularly insidious because it convinces people they're making smart financial decisions when they're actually digging themselves deeper into debt. You tell yourself you're being responsible by financing a reliable vehicle instead of dealing with an older car that might break down. But what you don't realize is that you've just committed to years of payments that will prevent you from building any real wealth or financial security. The emotional toll of being car poor extends far beyond monthly budgets and creates stress that affects every aspect of daily life. Half of Americans have delayed necessary car repairs or upgrades due to financial strain, which means they're driving around in vehicles that might not be safe or reliable. When you can't afford to fix your brakes properly or replace worn tires, you're not just risking your financial future, you're potentially risking your actual future. Many car poor Americans have fundamentally altered their lifestyles to accommodate their vehicle expenses. 40% have cut back on dining out, 32% have reduced social activities, and 31% have slashed vacation spending just to keep their cars running. 13% have even canceled their Netflix subscriptions to afford their car payments, which tells you something about priority hierarchies when transportation costs get out of control. Think about what this means for social connections and quality of life. When you can't afford to go out with friends, take vacations, or participate in activities that bring joy and meaning to your life, you're essentially working to pay for the privilege of driving to work. It's a hamster wheel disguised as freedom, and millions of Americans are running on it without realizing there might be other options. The dining out statistic particularly fascinates me because it represents such a fundamental shift in how people socialize and connect with others. Food has always been central to human relationships and community building, but now people are choosing between maintaining their vehicles and maintaining their social lives. When transportation costs force you to become a hermit, something has gone seriously wrong with the system. This social isolation compounds the financial stress because people lose the support networks and relationships that might help them find better job opportunities or navigate financial challenges. You become trapped not just by the monthly payments, but by the lifestyle restrictions those payments impose on every other aspect of your life. The generational impact of car poverty is particularly concerning because it's preventing young adults from achieving traditional markers of financial progress and stability. When half of Gen Z can't pursue homeownership, education, or retirement planning because of vehicle costs, we're looking at a fundamental breakdown in the economic mobility that previous generations took for granted. These are people who should be in their prime wealth building years, but instead they're watching their earning potential get consumed by transportation expenses that their parents and grandparents never had to deal with at this scale. The average car payment today represents a larger percentage of median income than it did 20 or 30 years ago, which means younger generations are starting their financial lives at a significant disadvantage. The ripple effects extend into housing markets, educational opportunities, and retirement security. When you're spending a quarter of your income on transportation, you can't save for a down payment on a house. When you can't afford additional education or training, you're stuck in lower paying jobs that make the car payments even more burdensome. When you can't contribute to retirement accounts, you're setting yourself up for decades of financial insecurity. What makes this particularly tragic is that many of these young adults are making what they believe are responsible financial decisions. They're buying reliable transportation to get to work, they're making their payments on time, and they're maintaining their vehicles properly. But the system is rigged in such a way that doing everything right still leaves them financially struggling and unable to build wealth. The used car market, which traditionally provided affordable transportation options for people with limited budgets, has become almost as expensive as buying new. When used cars average $25,000, we've essentially eliminated the budget-friendly option that allowed previous generations to get reliable transportation without destroying their financial futures. This price inflation in the used car market is particularly cruel because it affects the people who can least afford it. Wealthy buyers can still purchase new vehicles and take advantage of warranties, financing incentives, and the latest safety and efficiency features, but people with limited incomes are forced to pay new car prices for used vehicles that might have hidden problems, no warranty coverage, and higher maintenance costs. The financing industry has responded to this affordability crisis by creating products that appear to solve the problem while actually making it worse. Extended loan terms, low down payment options, and subprime lending might make monthly payments seem manageable, but they're designed to extract maximum profit from people who are already financially vulnerable. When you see advertisements promoting 0% financing or 96-month payment plans, what you're really seeing is an industry that has recognized transportation has become unaffordable for most Americans and decided to profit from that crisis rather than address it. They're not making cars more affordable, they're just spreading the unaffordability over longer periods and charging interest for the privilege. The maintenance and repair costs that come with vehicle ownership add another layer of financial stress that many people don't fully anticipate when they're focused on monthly payments. A single major repair can cost thousands of dollars, and these expenses always seem to happen at the worst possible times financially. When your transmission fails or your engine needs major work, you're not just dealing with the immediate cost of repairs, you're also dealing with lost wages from missing work, potential rental car expenses, and the stress of not knowing whether it makes more sense to fix an older vehicle or take on additional debt for a replacement. This unpredictability makes budgeting nearly impossible for car poor households because you never know when a major expense will completely derail your financial plans. You might be barely managing your monthly payments and then suddenly need to come up with $3,000 for repairs on a car that's only worth $5,000. The psychological impact of these financial pressures extends beyond individual stress and affects relationships, mental health, and overall life satisfaction. When you're constantly worried about making car payments, affording repairs, or replacing an unreliable vehicle, it's difficult to focus on other important aspects of life like career development, relationships, or personal growth. Many car poor Americans report feeling trapped and hopeless about their financial situations because transportation feels like a non-negotiable expense in most parts of the country. Unlike housing, where you might have options to downsize or relocate, or food, where you can adjust your spending based on your budget, reliable transportation often feels like an all-or-nothing proposition. This creates a mental prison where people convince themselves they have no choice but to accept crushing transportation costs, even when those costs are preventing them from achieving every other financial goal they claim to care about. You start to rationalize spending more on your car than some people spend on rent because the alternative feels like complete social and economic isolation. The debt consolidation that happens when people roll negative equity into new loans represents one of the most predatory aspects of modern car financing. When you owe $6,754 more than your car is worth, the logical response should be to keep driving that car until the loan balance comes down or the vehicle completely dies. Instead, the industry has created a system that encourages you to compound your debt by rolling that underwater amount into an even larger loan for a newer vehicle. This is mathematically insane, but it's presented as a reasonable solution to an affordability problem that the industry itself created. You're essentially borrowing money to pay off money you borrowed for something that's now worth less than what you borrowed. If this happened in any other area of finance, people would recognize it as a scam immediately. The fact that 22% of new vehicle financing now involves 7-year terms should terrify anyone who understands how money and depreciation work. You're committing to pay for something longer than most people stay at their jobs, longer than many relationships last, and definitely longer than the warranty coverage that might protect you from expensive repairs. By year 4 or 5 of that 7-year loan, you're making payments on a vehicle that's likely experiencing its first major maintenance issues while simultaneously losing value faster than you're paying down the principal. This creates a situation where you're paying premium prices for increasingly unreliable transportation, which defeats the entire purpose of financing a newer vehicle in the first place. The opportunity cost of being car poor extends far beyond the obvious inability to save money for other goals. Every dollar that goes toward excessive transportation costs is a dollar that can't compound and grow through investments. If you're spending an extra $300 per month on vehicle expenses compared to a more reasonable transportation budget, that's $3,600 annually that could be working for your future instead of disappearing into a depreciating asset. Over a 20-year period, that extra $300 monthly invested in a simple index fund earning 7% annually would grow to approximately $150,000. That's enough money to buy 3 cars with cash, make a substantial down payment on a house, or provide a foundation for early retirement. Instead, it's gone forever, consumed by the machinery of transportation financing. The psychological manipulation involved in modern car marketing deserves its own analysis because it's designed to exploit the exact financial vulnerabilities that create car poverty. Advertisements focus on monthly payments rather than total costs, making a $30,000 purchase sound reasonable because it's only $400 per month. They emphasize lifestyle and status rather than transportation utility, convincing people they need features and capabilities they'll rarely, if ever, use. The 0% financing offers that appear so attractive typically require excellent credit and substantial down payments, meaning they're primarily available to people who could afford to pay cash anyway. For everyone else, these promotions create an anchor point that makes higher interest rates seem reasonable by comparison. You think you're getting a deal at 4% when the promotional rate was 0, even though 4% on a 7-year loan represents thousands of dollars in additional costs. Seasonal sales events and model year clearances create artificial urgency designed to prevent rational financial decision making. You're told you need to act now to get this incredible deal, which discourages the kind of careful budgeting and comparison shopping that might reveal you can't actually afford the purchase. The entire sales process is engineered to get you focused on whether you can make the monthly payment rather than whether the purchase makes sense for your overall financial situation. So there you have it. Being car poor in 2025 isn't just about bad financial decisions or keeping up with the Joneses. It's about a system that has turned basic transportation into a wealth extraction machine that's quietly destroying the financial futures of millions of Americans. If you're trapped in this cycle, you're not alone, and more importantly, you're not stupid. But now that you understand how the game is rigged, you can start making different choices. Your future self will thank you for breaking free from the hamster wheel disguised as freedom.